A massive shout out to the Jonin tier member Mr. Leroy 1998 and Jenin tier Leah Rov. Your support means a lot. If you would like your name mentioned in every video, support the channel, as well as receive special perks and soon having early access to new series, consider becoming a member of this channel by hitting that join button. Hi guys, this is the final part of What If Naruto Had the Most Powerful Ice Zanpakuto Hyorinmaru. I hope you enjoy. Places, people, Madara said loudly, waving his hands authoritatively. Re-on in 5. Everything's gotta be set up in time. Move it, move it, move it. Calm down, said Aizen, sitting comfortably on a chair reading a magazine, his ankles folded and resting on a plump footrest. Shonen Jump was blazoned across the magazine's front, and the end of Aizen was written in bold near the bottom corner. He arched an eyebrow at something he read, then spared a quick glance at Madara. Everything's going fine. You don't need to get all excited. Unlike you, Mr. Executive Producer, Madara hissed, I am doing my job. Aizen rolled his eyes and smiled behind his magazine. Calm down, Madara, a voice said suddenly, ringing with clear amusement. Madara spun to find the figure of a tall man, just shy of 6 feet, standing behind him, gray-blue eyes twinkling like Albus Dumbledore. Why do you think you had such a minor role? I wanted you to have time to dedicate to your other duties. A harried-looking, mousy girl bustled over, her sandy brown hair frayed and frazzled. Her wire-rimmed glasses were askew and she was handling a steaming mug of something, her scarf loose and barely hanging to her around her shoulders. Whatever it was that was in the mug, she was clearly trying desperately not to spill it while she rushed. Your Earl Grey, Mr. Fawkes, she said hurriedly, offering the mug to the blue-eyed man, who took it with a quiet, thank you, as she tried to catch her breath. 3 sugars and a lemon, gently stirred and steeped for 5 minutes, just how you like it. You know me too well, Alice, Mr. Fawkes said with a smile. Alice gave him a look. It was you who dragged me down this rabbit hole, sir, she said dryly. At least I got something out of it. She hurried off a moment later. Hey, James, Aizen greeted flippantly, turning the page of his magazine. You know, despite the year-long setback, I enjoyed that vacation. Think you could give us another one? Afraid not, James said, laughing heartily. I might not slave you as hard as Kubo and his animator friends, who had you dancing a jig twice a week until a few weeks ago, but I have to give something at least once a month. It's my personal quota. Madara looked him up and down, scrutinizing the immaculate uniform. The overcoat was long and white with 2 tiny golden chains stretching across the front, the undershirt was black silk and embroidered with the stylized gold silhouette of a phoenix that rose up from the collar and hem of the overcoat to reach for his neck, and the pants were the color of freshly fallen snow and looked just as soft. The ends of a red satin sash hung down over his left leg and black leather boots that reached nearly halfway up his shins matched a pair of gloves that were hanging, stuffed halfway in, from one of the coat's almost invisible pockets. Madara couldn't help but think that it was rather similar to the uniform of those Night of Rounds guys in one of the other projects that didn't go anywhere. There was also something off about him, something Madara had noticed many times before. There was a cool, calculated intellect about him, a sharpness to those kind blue eyes that his demeanor belied. Whenever he saw it, Madara was reminded of the character Aizen Sosuke, the character played by the man lounging not far away reading manga. They both had the same air, and whenever Madara saw that sharpness in James's eyes, he was reminded also of a particular line Aizen had loved saying during the actual recording. It's hard to step on ants without crushing them, and what does it matter if you're sweeping up one speck of dirt or two? At least you're taking this seriously, he muttered, shoving away his discomfort. Wow, JD, a voice said, and a grinning Naruto walked over, hands shoved in his pockets. You sure you're looking fancy enough? Naruto, James greeted with a sly smile. I thought you and Hinata were, busy. Naruto's face lit up in a bright blush, then he spun around and fled as fast as his feet could carry him, promising revenge at the top of his lungs. 1 minute, everyone, a voice called. All right, places, Madara yelled. The chaos around them settled down and James walked onto set, sipping gingerly at his tea as he sat down into a large armchair that looked ready to burst its stuffing. He seemed to sink halfway into it, wriggling with a frown on his face until he finally got comfortable. He reclined just as the countdown began. 5, 4, 3, 2, hey, everyone. Thought I'd give you this as a bonus, just because. This is my commentary on Sit Upon the Frozen Heavens. So let's get it started. First of all, SUTFH is the biggest, most popular project I've ever done. I wrote it, and I couldn't believe just how much of a monster it grew into. It started off as a half-baked idea that I had inspiration for, and Toshiro was one of my favorite Bleach characters that gave Naruto Hyorinmaru. But then it grew. To make a world real, to give the characters depth and dimension, there has to be dynamism. Kishimoto's Naruto isn't that dynamic. He gets stronger at a pace that's ridiculous, considering how long it took him to learn Kage Bunshin and Rasengan, but doesn't really grow up much. That's why Shippuden isn't as interesting as the first part. But my Naruto grew, stronger, smarter, into a better, more mature person. He was still a little awkward socially, but he was mostly a well-rounded character. His mind and skills sharpened, all thanks to Hyorinmaru, who taught him the things he needed to know to be a good warrior, not a good ninja. I've had some people say his power was unrealistic. But really, if you'd seen how quickly Toshiro advanced, he was out of the Shinigami Academy nearly as fast as Jin, who took a year instead of the usual 6, and a captain within 50 years of graduating, and if you really thought about how quickly Naruto learned some stuff in canon, in less than a month, he learned Sage Mode to a degree that even Jiraiya could not, even with at least 30 years more experience, it shouldn't be so surprising. My version of Naruto simply went about it a different way, one that showed off his power more. But there are still so many of you who like this story. There are still so many of you who stayed with him to the end, and others who are following him as he teaches Ichigo in Crisis Core, the Azure Moon. To those, I say thank you, for it is you who are inspiring me to revise and add to SUTFH. Yes, you read right. One of the things that has held me back as a writer is that I have difficult writing some of the more boring parts of the story. There are several things I skipped in SUTFH, including Naruto's short fight with Kimimaro during the retrieval arc, parts of the Tsunade arc, Gamabunta during the Chunin Exams, the list goes on. These are things whose scenes in the manga and anime I would have to spend hours searching for and hours more writing. I simply didn't want to do that before. Now, I'm considering it. So, from here on out, I've decided to answer major questions. This story is technically complete, so it will remain labeled as such, but I will add to this chapter at least once a month to address questions posed in reviews, at least ones whose answers will be significantly in-depth. If you want to ask a question, review this chapter and I'll either answer you directly or add it to the text. That means, of course, that I won't answer questions posed in a review to a chapter before this, though I may actually answer questions about CCTAM. You are warned, though, that flamers will be strung up and made example of, for I have no tolerance for hateful, cynical reviews whose only purpose is to try and tear me down, especially since they fail. So, if you've got a question, ask it. The worst that could happen is that I just won't answer it. Now, I've gotten some questions about Tenten. Some asked if my plans for her were fully developed when first I gave her Soonga. The answer to this is a resounding no. Originally, you see, I had planned to have 5 elemental dragons. I would have Hyorinmaru for ice, Ryujin Jaka for fire, Murakumo for lightning, Soonga for air wind, and an as of yet unnamed Zanpakuto for earth. The plan was for these to be the strongest of their element and each would be weak against one of the others, like the Naruto World Elemental Jutsu. This didn't really pan out. No, I should be more accurate. I still plan to do the 5 elemental thing, it just won't play as big a role. The Knights thing has taken more importance to the storyline. But I digress. No, I didn't originally plan to have Tenten show up as Tatsuki with a huge role in the sequel. I still don't. I might have her show up for Hawako Mundo, but that's a ways off yet, and she's a mortal girl now. Naruto, even though he still has access to his original body, will not fall for her, she's still fully mortal, human. He will feel, the verb tense is really confusing for this issue, it would be as though he were trying to replace Tenten, and that is something he refuses to do. Any man who's ever loved a woman, wholly, truly loved her, will tell you that you can fall in love with another woman, but that it'll never be the same as when you loved that first woman. And you won't cheapen your love for either by trying to use one to replace the other's spot in your heart unless you're mourning the other really, really badly. Hope that answers the Tenten issue. If not, I'm sure I could add more to it. Alright, another thing is Hyôrinmaru. I've not really had any questions about him, but I wanted to clear something up. In Bleach, Most Zanpakuto are born from the individual soul of a Shinigami. It's noted, however, that Hyorinmaru is an exception, and I've come to address why he is, at least in my story. Hyorinmaru belongs to Naruto, end of story. Period. He's been with Naruto since first Naruto was created. He was there when Naruto was Rakuto Sennin, and all the past lives that came before. The reason why Diamond Dust Rebellion will work with my story is because of what Naruto did with him. He tore the Kyubi's power away from his body, the trauma of which severed his chain of fate and made him a true Shinigami. Though his human body is still technically alive, he's like Ichigo and made Toshiro from that power using the same technique the Rakuto Sennin used to create the Biju. Toshiro, however, was still technically connected to Naruto, and when given Hyorinmaru could access a significant portion of his potential. However, the trauma that divided them made Hyorinmaru's connection to his master weaker because his master was split in two, and so when Naruto created Toshiro, Hyorinmaru was split in two, and a smaller, much weaker part incapable of Bankai branched off to create bond with Kusaka Sojiro. Get it? In regards to Naruto's Bankai, it has three forms, and each of these three forms dedicates itself to parts of an extreme, that is to say, the power of his Bankai and its size. Because of how this works, Daiguren and Tenko Hyorinmaru are on either end of the extremes. Daiguren follows the Bankai is big rule. When unleashed by Naruto, Daiguren Hyorinmaru turns most inanimate objects, especially liquids, within range of its spiritual pressure to ice. It also adds a few somewhat bulky additions to the wielder: wings, gauntlets, greaves, tail, etc. The power of this Bankai form is diluted because it follows the Bib rule and so uses a significant portion of its power to not only activate, but to maintain. Bishamonten Hyorinmaru is comfortably in the middle. It's not quite as big as Daiguren and its radius of influence is smaller because it is more compact, but all three forms use Tenso Jurin. Because it's smaller, its raw power is more focused and less spread out, so its base attack power is greater than Daiguren. Daiguren is a good all-around Bankai because its defense and offense are balanced out, even though its offense isn't as strong as Bishamonten. Bishamonten Hyorinmaru is a better offensive Bankai, but it still has a formidable defense, just that the defense isn't as balanced with its offense as Daiguren's is. Then there's Tenko Hyorinmaru. It's on the extreme opposite of Daiguren. All of its power, the power normally used to make the Bankai and sustain it, is compressed into a single blade, like Byakuya's Senki, Senbon Kujyoshi and Ichigo's Tensa Zangetsu. Because all that power is compressed into that single sword, all of the features present in the other two forms are gone: the wings, appendages of ice, everything that could defend Naruto from attack. In exchange, however, the sheer attack power of his Bankai is massive enough to permanently alter the landscape with a single swing. And, because of how it functions, Naruto also gets his ultimate defense, a body made of water that cannot be destroyed without use of extreme heat or without an arid environment. It can be damaged, but as long as there is water, that damage is temporary. In this Bankai form, the only way to beat him is to vaporize his body, exhaust him, which can happen quickly if he uses a lot of powerful attacks consecutively, or bind him with Kido. In this form, all of water is his weapon, all of heaven is under his dominion. See you later, everybody. But now that I think of it, one last thing. Recently, it has come to my attention that some have deemed it necessary to try correcting my usage of Japanese. Regretfully, I must ask that all of you refrain. I'm sure you mean well, but it would be presumptuous of you to correct me. Few of you have any formal learning in the Japanese language. Most of what you know, in fact, is gleaned from reading stories such as mine. Unless you have had at least 4 years of instruction from a native speaker of Japanese or are a native speaker yourself, it would simply be pretentious and arrogant of you to presume you know enough to correct me, and pretenses and presumptions, and especially arrogance, are rather dangerous things. Don't you agree? So, as a favor, I shall correct those of you with presumptions. Others would not have bothered, but I am kind, so I shall correct those in need of correction. Sanin does not mean, of the three, and even if it did, Hubby Sanin, or, supposedly, Snake of the Three, would not make much sense. If you were to find yourself in Konoha and asked about the Hubby Sanin, you would be given quite a few strange looks. Sanin means three people, or, in this case, if the proper kanji is supplied, it means three ninja. Senin means sage. Hubby Senin therefore, means snake sage, which is the appropriate term for Orochimaru, just as Jiraiya is the Gamma Sennin, the toad sage. The full and proper title, which is rather taxing to write every time, would be Densetsu no Sanin no Habi Sennin, or Snake Sage of the Legendary Three Ninja. Please do not make such mistakes in the future. There is no cause for alarm, however. I am confident that most of you will not make such a mistake. This section has been entirely for those that do or will. If you have made such a mistake, then do not fret. I have already forgiven you. I must ask, however, that you not make such a mistake again. But there is another mistake that you shouldn't make, and it would be remiss of me not to clarify what that mistake is. I never asked any of you to trust me, only to listen and read and review. I asked that you never correct me unless you know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, because you had far more tutelage in the Japanese language than I did, that you were, in fact, correct. I never expressed such confidence in my grasp of a language than I did in my Japanese and, as should be obvious, in modern American English. If I made a mistake with Latin or the older, more formal-sounding English that might have been found in the 15th, 16th, or 17th century Anno Domini, and you know, because you have experience that I do not, that I did indeed make a mistake, then you may correct me. It is only natural. So it is remiss of you, any of you, to assume I believe myself a master of any of the languages I use. I am not even a master of modern American English. A language is a living, breathing thing. So long as there are people to speak it, it will grow and evolve. It is, therefore, remiss of you to assume I arrogantly believe myself the best linguist in the world. I know I am not. Yet, I find there is one last thing I must ask of you. I must ask that you who have something to say to me, a bone to pick, as it were, or an axe to grind, or if you want to insult me or flame me, have the courage to at least own up to your words. Leaving me a message under the cloak of anonymity is an act of an immature coward, too scared to take responsibility for himself. You cannot hide under the guise of laziness and claim that you did not want to go through the trouble of signing in. That excuse is pathetically transparent, and it would do you a disservice far greater than any insult you may throw at me. And here we are again, at that time of happy farewell. Such a misfortune, no dialogue to make things interesting. More's the pity. Have a nice day. Next time, you'll have to stay for tea. This part was really short. There is a prequel written by the author. Be sure to check it out, link in the description. Thanks for watching.